Annalee Kruger is the founder and president of CareRight Incorporated. Annalee is passionate about helping people be proactive in developing senior care plans for those seniors in our lives, whether it's our moms, our dads, our aunts, our uncles, good neighbors down the street, whoever is in your life that you are going to be caring for and helping with. We want to make sure that you have the right plan in place and that you're talking to experts that can help you develop a plan for either staying at home or moving into the appropriate facilities at the appropriate times and having the appropriate budget and understanding what those decisions are really going to mean as far as an impact to you and the loved ones in your life. You are going to want to pay attention to this conversation because Annalee has some great examples, some heartbreaking examples, but also has a bunch of wisdom that she is sharing with all of us that have seniors in our lives that we are helping to take care of. Hello, and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. More Than Grand is a fantastic resource for grandparents and parents alike. Dee Moore has spent a lot of time pulling together some great resources to help parents and grandparents navigate these new roles that we find ourselves in. Whether you're an old pro at being a grandfather or grandmother, or this is brand new to you, More Than Grand has resources that are sure to help you and enhance your relationship with both your grandchildren as well as their parents. Now, Dee has been really generous in being able to share with us a 10% discount on any purchases that you make from More Than Grand. And we've got a coupon, Cool Grandpa 10, that's available at checkout that will take 10% off any purchase of these fantastic products that Dee has for you. As we get started, I want to remind you, you're in for a real treat. This conversation with Annalee is fantastic and chock full of information. So without further ado, let's jump into our fantastic conversation with Annalee Kruger. Hi, Annalee. Thank you so much for being on the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I'm excited to have this important and informative conversation with you about senior planning and how we as, grandpa age might be balancing out caregiving for our moms and dads and uncles and people older than us, as well as we've also got to balance out how do we spoil those grandkids, right?
You got that right. Thanks for having me on your show today, Greg. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about senior planning and kind of things that people in our age, that 40 plus age group, needs to be thinking about now, sooner versus rather than later.
Absolutely. And as we get started, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your background and how you got into helping people with senior planning.
Sure. So I actually come from a long line of family caregivers. My grandparents moved in with us on the farm when I was growing up, because back then in the 70s, we didn't have independent living, assisted living. It was either if they couldn't manage at home on their own, then they would have to live with their family or move into a nursing home. So I knew when I was 9 that I was going to be working with families and caregivers and elderly loved ones in some fashion. So I went into social work and worked in long-term care, continuing care retirement communities for 18 years. But part of that was social work, but then executive director. So I was the administrator of continuing care retirement communities. And part of my role was always to do the tours with these families, which was, not surprising, pretty much always the adult kids. because mom's in the hospital and she's not going to be doing tours of her care facilities on her own. So it's always the adult kids who end up doing these tours in crisis mode. And the kids would come in and the hospital would say, here's a list of facilities. Go find one by noon tomorrow because we're discharging your mom. And the kids would be like, oh my gosh, we have no idea what questions to ask, what to look for. We don't really get along. But now, of course, I have to make decisions and I don't even know what kind of decisions because we've never talked about this. So I got, part of my job as an employee was always doing those tours, and I would spend, an hour or two doing the tours, depending on what all levels of care I needed to show them. But then I was spending 2 and 3 hours at a time with each family, just answering questions like, why is mom acting this way? Well, they didn't understand dementia, or they didn't understand Parkinson's disease. Or when I would ask the kids, does your mom have a living will, a power of attorney, long-term care insurance? Does your dad have VA benefits? The answers were always, I don't know. Our family never talked about stuff like this. It never occurred to us to talk about it. So in 2011, after 18 years of working with families in a variation of the same predicament, which was crisis management, I decided to start my own company, leave corporate America, and start my own virtual family consultancy. And now we work with families all across the country in facilitating their family meetings to talk about the what whens of aging, so that when that stroke happens or when that fall happens, this is not the first time that the family is having these types of conversations, and they actually have a viable aging plan that they can literally pull out and be like, oh, this is what we're going to do now because this is what Care Right taught us. So
that's great information. And I think one of the things you brought up too was just the whole planning for senior care. And what I would love to do is have you define what is senior planning, kind of what's in that bucket and what's out of that bucket.
yeah. So I would love to reach families in the proactive, what I would consider that proactive space. That's why I do all these podcasts and speaking engagements. That's why I wrote my book. you know, Ideally, as a family, if you have aging parents, that should just automatically trigger of, what, they're not always going to be healthy. They're not always going to be safe at home. They may not always have their mind. They may end up with dementia or some chronic disease that affects their mobility. And so part of that aging plan or senior care planning is we need to start the conversations now about, mom and dad, what do you have in place? Do you have a living will, power of attorney? Who's your financial advisor? Who's your estate attorney? Who do you have for long-term care insurance? Do you have your funeral taken care of? Where are these documents? And what is, that's one huge piece of it. Because I can tell you on the flip side, when you choose to wait until you're in crisis mode, when you have to make big decisions quickly, that is not the time. That's not ideal to have to be having these conversations then, when emotions are high and time is limited and you have to make big decisions, to only then find out that you don't even have the power of attorney, or there was no plan on how to pay for care. So we want to get these conversations started sooner rather than later. Another piece of that senior care plan, or what I call an aging plan, is, mom and dad, what are your goals as you age? Now, the reality is families are not going to have these family meetings on their own because they're in uncharted territory. So they're not even going to know what questions to ask or how to maneuver the emotionalness of these types of conversations. And so that's why we do that as a neutral third party family meeting facilitator is, Ethel and Marvin, what are your goals as you age? And this way it gets everything out on the table. And of course, parents are going to say the same thing, because in my now 30 years of working with families all across the country, when I ask mom and dads, what are your goals as you age? It's always the same thing. Want to age in place at home, meaning I'm not leaving my house unless I'm in a body bag. That's what they say. And I don't want to be a burden on my kids. But guess who? Which generation is the one calling my company Care Rights Incorporated? Because they are now becoming mom and dad's parent, or mom and dad's parents and decision makers and caregivers. And it's not a comfortable role to be in. So we talk about, what does that really look like to age in place at home? How expensive is that? Medicare does not pay for that. And so how did you structure your financial plan with your financial planner? How did your financial planner help you structure your financial plan so that when you need care, you have money there to pay for it? Because again, this is all private pay, unless, of course, you have long-term care insurance, VA benefits, reverse mortgage, other buckets that you can pull from. And so the reality is, and this is why so much of our consultancy is really educating families, because they don't know all this stuff, right? They don't know that Medicare doesn't pay for home care. And so they don't know that home care can be $30 to $60 an hour, depending on where you live. And these home care companies have, shift minimums that you have to agree to hire them for, otherwise they won't work with you. So it's a lot of education. So we have a big piece of that conversation is, what does aging in place really look like? How expensive is it? I have clients paying $30,000 a month because they wanted to age in place at home. And that's fine if you've got the money to do that. But then what's the plan look like? And this is that second piece of an aging plan. What does that look like? What's the plan if or when you can't keep paying $30,000 a month in home care, or you've realized it's not safe, or you can't find reliable workers to show up for their shifts, and then mom goes without a caregiver for 12 hours and she falls, or she doesn't eat, or she doesn't get to the bathroom and she has accidents in her chair, and now her house smells like
Right.
unpleasantness. So what does that look like? And families, every single family is like, oh, I never thought about any of this stuff. Well, you wouldn't, because you're in uncharted territory. And that's why families hire us, is to help them think about all of these pros and cons. The other thing that we talk about is, if, what's the plan if you can't stay at home? We have to have that plan B, because even though moms and dads want to age in place at home, and as us kids, we want to honor that, assisted living centers, memory care facilities, and nursing homes are also full of people who wanted to stay at home. It's just not always feasible. And the decisions that families make today will impact their future care options later. Meaning, if you spend all your money on home care trying to age in place at home, and now you're like, wow, we just went through $500,000 in the last 3 years trying to take care of mom and dad at home. Now we can't afford to get into any kind of quality care facility because we used all our money on home care. So that's why we try to get families to work with us on a proactive nature, so that they don't unintentionally jeopardize, because they don't know what they don't know, current and future care options.
There's a whole bunch there that's running through my mind,
Yes.
and even just having this conversation, I'm starting to feel overwhelmed, and I can just imagine the people that are in situations where this hits all at one time. They've got a week where the phone call is, there's a stroke, there's a heart attack, there's an event of some kind, and then you've got all that emotion about the immediate care going on, and then it's the, what do we do from here?
Yeah.
With siblings, with everybody's baggage and perspectives and everything else. So this is quite overwhelming. Can you give us an example of what can typically happen if you wait to have these conversations, and how
Yeah.
these things kind of blow up?
Yeah. So I mean, there's variations of extremeness, right? But let me just share a scenario of a family that I am working with, who um, I met with them initially because when I started Care Right in 2011, I went virtual right away, because by then families were already starting to move away from each other. I started my company in the Milwaukee market. So mom would be in Milwaukee, but the kids were everywhere else, right? And so when the kids would call me, they're like, "Oh, we can't afford to just keep flying back to Milwaukee and to meet with you." And I was like, "Well, you don't have to, because we use Skype, because that's what we had back then." So so ideally, working with these families proactively, wherever they live across the country or across the world. But let me share with you this. So I have this family that I was working with recently who I talked to on Zoom, because now I use Zoom for the last like 5, 6 years. And I do a free 30-minute consult just to kind of get a sense of what's going on with this family. It's a variation of the same thing. You know, I'm taking care of mom and dad. I'm getting burned out. I'm overwhelmed. I'm resentful. The same thing each call. They had their mother on Zoom with them because she would have to be the one. In this particular case, they felt like mom would have to be the one to make the decision about what to do, because she's the primary caregiver of her husband, their dad, who has mid-stage dementia. So I'm on the Zoom with them as their consult, and mom looks so haggard. She's so tired. I mean, you can just see she's exhausted. You don't even have to be a trained professional to see how just in over her head she was, but too prideful to say, I need help. And that's one of our generational things. You know, that generation doesn't want to ask for help because they feel like that's their spouse is their responsibility, and that they're not honoring their wedding vows if they ask for help. That's a very common mindset of that kind of 80, 90, and 100-year-old age group. So I talked to the kids and the mom about, we have to safeguard you, Ethel, as the primary caregiver, because we know how overwhelming and burdening being a caregiver can be, especially to someone with dementia, where it is a 24/7 job. And you can't sleep with both eyes closed and both ears closed and all that kind of stuff, right? It's one thing if you're taking care of a spouse who has a broken hip, and in 4 to 6 weeks they'll kind of be back on track. But dementia, that's a long-term caregiving scenario. So I went through what an aging plan would look like for them and their family. And I said, you're in crisis mode. You just don't know it yet, because if something happens to mom, and that's why we have to always safeguard that primary caregiver, you have no plan in place for your dad or your mom's now health issues because she's so burned out. Well, they're like, oh, well, we'll just step up and take care. We'll handle things better. We'll get more involved, and we'll ask mom what she needs from us, which that doesn't help, because again, they're so prideful. So 6 months pass, and on a Saturday morning at 7 o'clock, I get this phone call, and of course I have them saved in my phone. And no one just calls me on a Saturday morning at 7 o'clock to say, hey, let's have a cup of coffee together. Or I was thinking about you and wanted to hang out with you on a call. So I took the call, of course, because I know that nothing good ever happens when they're calling like that. And this is what happened. So they didn't move forward with an aging plan with care, right? They didn't do anything, actually. And so what happened is the kids, there's 4 kids, and in this day and age, siblings don't talk every day, right? They might talk periodically and throughout a month or 3 or 4 months. But so it turns out that all 4 kids had been texting mom and being like, hey, mom, love you. Well, they never really talked as siblings, to only find out that 4 or 5 days passed of trying to get a hold of mom, and no one got a hold of her. And so they're like, hey, did you hear from mom? Because I haven't heard from her this week. And that's what stemmed this whole thing. And so the daughter that lives the closest is a 5-hour drive from where mom and dad live. Everybody else, it's a plane ride away, which is our typical profile of families these days. So the daughter hops in the car, takes on this like Thursday, and she drives to mom and dad's, only to find that when she went through the door of her mom and dad's house, dad didn't recognize her at all. The house smelled terribly. Dad is totally disheveled. She's like, where's mom? And first she had to get through this, I'm your daughter, I'm Shannon, or whatever, and then she's like, where's mom? Mom was dead on the kitchen floor.
Wow.
And so as you unpack this, number one, dad didn't recognize the daughter. Mom's dead on the kitchen floor. She'd been there a while. That's why no one could hear from her, because she was dead. Dad is too demented to even know who his daughter is. And at that stage, they also don't know how to use a telephone. And so here he'd been walking around, in the house with his dead wife for a period of days, not knowing what to do, because mom's role as the caregiver was to make sure he had his medications. He obviously didn't have his medications this whole period of time. He obviously hadn't been toileted, which is something that the wife always helped him with to keep him clean. At his stage of dementia, he's incontinent, so he's not getting to the bathroom or not knowing where the bathroom is. And so there's BM all over the couch, the floor. Like this is a mess, right? And so think about this family who has the shock of dad doesn't know who I am consistently. He's not safe to live at home on his own, and mom is dead. What do we do? So, of course, they have no idea where any kind of estate documents are. Like, now they have to, and because they couldn't find them, and dad is not able to make decisions on his own, now they had to file for emergency guardianship, right? Mom and dad didn't have funeral plans done, and so they're planning a funeral. So can you imagine like how this family, like all this ickiness that this family is going through? So they're grieving a very unexpected, well, shouldn't be unexpected because we talked about that on the consult call, but denial is a great place to be until you can't be there anymore. And they're like, oh, this is what you said would most likely happen if we didn't do anything. And I said, I know, but let's just move forward, because here we are now. And so, so now they also have to plan a funeral, but they're like, what do we do with dad? Because he can't be here. Well, they have no idea what they have for finances. And so then as the family is like all gathering now at the house, everybody's like now emergency flights to like get to mom and dad's and do this funeral. So as they're in the house and they're looking through stuff, they see that there's like stacks of mail that mom she was too overwhelmed, and they weren't there enough to really know what's really going on underneath that roof. And so there was like 3 months of mail just piled up everywhere. And so bills hadn't necessarily been getting paid properly. So can you see like how big of a mess this is? And it's a lot of it just because families are in denial. They assume that their parents are doing better than they really are. So the kicker is, well, everything about this scenario is a kicker. Just the financial cost. When you think about just the financial cost, they had no idea where their parents were from a financial perspective. A funeral has to get planned and paid for. The attorney fees for this emergency guardianship are thousands of dollars. And then what are we going to do with dad? The family had never met the parents' financial advisor. So that's a whole nother problem. Financial planners not taking time or seeing the value of meeting that second generation. So the kids are going into this whole thing blind. And since dad can't be at home and nobody lives in that immediate area, they're like, what do we do with dad? And that's again why they hired us, because there's just all this, because families do call us when they're in crisis like that. Because I'm the person that they've talked to in the past, and they've got, oh yeah, this is the stuff Annalee talked about, we should call her. So here we are working with care options for dad. And it's like, where does it make sense to have dad live? And unfortunately, where the closest daughter lives, that she felt she would have the most time to be able to, be his advocate and visit him and stuff like that. The sad thing is that there's only 2 memory care facilities where the daughter lives. And one of them has a 6-month waiting list, and the other one is a female only memory care facility. So this is the kind of predicament or jam that families find themselves in when they don't plan ahead. And so Unfortunately, when you don't plan ahead, you end up in whatever facility has an open bed that you qualify for. And so before they could even move dad into a care facility, so now he's in a memory care facility an hour and a half away from where the daughter lives. And before they could even move him in there, the other thing families don't think about that, and they wouldn't know this, and that's why we work with them and teach them, is you have to financially qualify to get into these different care homes, assisted living, memory care, nursing home. You have to fill out like an application to make sure that you have enough money. Most of them you need to have anywhere from a year to 5 years of private pay. You also have to you also have to physically qualify, so you can't be too sick or too immobile to be able to move into certain levels of care. You also have to qualify behaviorally. So if dad was aggressive, violent, paranoid, abusive, they're not going to move him in there because that's too big of a liability, right? So all of this stuff has to happen, and that takes time. And you have to have a doctor evaluate your parent and say, yeah, here's what their needs are. Here's what level of care this is that your loved one needs. So all this stuff has to happen before your loved one can even move into a facility. And that facility has to have all this paperwork in place before your loved one can move in there. And so families don't understand all that process and what that looks like. And so they're learning all of this at the 11th hour when they're already emotionally burned out and scared and overwhelmed. And that's why I try to reach these families ahead of time and say, look, if anybody who has aging parents, we have to get our heads out of the sand and say something at some point is going to happen to them. We don't get healthier as we age. We should probably put a plan together, just like when you have kids. You don't, well, hopefully people aren't having kids just willy-nilly and just hoping for the best. But we plan for everything else in our life. We plan to go out to eat. We plan vacations. We plan our retirement. We plan when we're going to spend time with the grandkids. Why wouldn't we plan for our aging parents? Or if you're a senior listening to this podcast, why wouldn't you plan for the periods of time when you're the most dependent and vulnerable and at the mercy of healthcare workers who may or may not be properly trained to take care of you? So let's pull together and let's start this whole dialogue of conversation sooner rather than later, so that you do as a family have the best possible care outcomes, the best family relationship outcomes, and you have all of your important documents in place and buttoned up, and they're up to date, and you have them at your fingertips, because you will need them at some point.
Oh, sure. And you gave us a lot to think about. And one of the things that jumps to mind as far as questions go is when we're ready emotionally to sit down with mom or dad, uncles, whoever we're taking care of or invested in, how do we start these conversations? And do you try to sit down and block out a Saturday afternoon and hit it all? Or do you start by like eating the elephant, taking a bite at a time?
It depends. If you're proactive, you have the luxury of time because mom and dad are doing relatively well, right? But you end up eating the entire elephant on a Saturday afternoon if you choose to wait until dad's in the hospital or mom died because she's burned out taking care of dad. Then you end up eating the entire elephant, and that's not comfortable. Elephants are big, right?
Yes.
So ideally, good analogy. So ideally, we start these conversations now, and I always tell families, leverage, because I do a lot of podcasts. And I'm like, okay, if you heard this conversation, this topic on a podcast, say, family, I was listening to this podcast and it just made me stop and think that, we've never talked about the what whens of aging, or what are your goals, or who's your financial advisor, or how are things really going at home? And so leverage this podcast if you're listening to this podcast and say, we need to start talking about these things, but also know that these are very intimidating conversations to have, and that's why people don't have them. Denial is great until you can't be there. We'll just figure things out, and that's one of the One of the mistakes most families make is denial, but also assuming that they have more time than they do. Just like that particular family, they just figured they could step up more, help mom out more, and then life got busy for them because it does. Life is busy for us, right? And there was no stepping up. So you can also leverage, mom, you went to a doctor, you lost weight. Let's talk about how things are going at home. If there's someone in your family that had a hospital stay or passed away and the family was completely like ill prepared, they had to plan the funeral and, leverage other people's crises situations and say, this made us stop and think that we don't have anything in order. Or if you're the adult child listening to this, take it personally. Say, mom, one of our neighbors, the ambulance was out there and it just made me think, what do we have in place here as a whole family? And take it personally and say, it never occurred to me at my age at 50, I should have a living will and a power of attorney and start working on my funeral arrangements and get my long-term care insurance. So you can start it out personally so it doesn't feel like, well, mom and dad, you don't have anything in order. Say, you know what? We're putting things in place for ourselves. We should extend this to you and dad and start these conversations and at least get some documents in order. But know again that these are hard conversations to have. Family dynamics aren't always comfortable. And that's why, again, that's one of our big service offerings is facilitating these family meetings and laying out the lay of the land, and so that you as a family can make informed decisions about what's right for you and your budget and what your goals are.
That's great advice, because I know there's 7 kids in my family. I'm the oldest. But like my wife likes to point out, when you get the 7 of us together, we revert back to me being 14 all the way
Yeah.
down to the youngest being like 7, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know why. We're all really getting older and all this. But for some reason, you get us all together. And so for our family dynamic, I think having somebody to officiate and kind
Mhm.
of, you know, call balls and strikes a little bit when we start getting either goofy or aggressive towards each other,
Yeah.
could be super helpful.
Yeah. It really is. Literally 100% of my clients say having us as the professionals facilitate their family meetings. Because here's the thing, some families do try to have these conversations, whether it's just the kids being like, hey, have you noticed that dad's losing his memory a little bit, or have you noticed that mom's lost weight? So there's some sidebar conversations, but no one is like addressing the elephant in the room, right? And so some families have tried to have these conversations, or if the daughter's the primary caregiver and she may be the healthcare, or she may be the healthcare power of attorney, but the brother is the financial power of attorney. And she's like, hey, John, dad and mom are taking a lot of my time. Between the two of them, they have like 8 doctor's appointments every month. I have to keep stepping away from work. My boss is getting frustrated with me. My colleagues are getting frustrated. I'm getting burned out. I can't juggle all of this. But then if the brother is the financial power of attorney and it's the daughter who's reached out to Care Right for a plan, and that's why I was like, all decision makers have to be on those consult calls, because the brother will sometimes say, oh, you're just blowing things out of proportion. You've always done that. That's where these family dynamics come into play. And she's like, no, seriously, like this is like a full-time job. So those types of family dynamics can come into play. And you would hope that aging or dementia or caregiving would bring families together. But I'm here to tell you that it does not. It usually does the opposite. And so 92% of my clients, my families, come to us in crisis mode. They don't know it until they know it. Like I can spot a family in crisis 7,000 miles away. But when we're on these consult calls, there's just this thick layer of denial that it's very hard to get through. And if they're not in enough pain yet because they're not overwhelmed or burned out, they're not going to see the value of working together until they realize they're in pain. But so that's why 92% of my families come to us in full blown crisis mode. The kicker, though, the real sad thing is 85% of those families, because now they're that much more burned out, they're that much more overwhelmed, dad is that much more demented, mom's Parkinson's has progressed that much more, that 85% of those families, I'm doing family mediation because they have different ideas of how well mom and dad are really doing, what is quality of life, how should their inheritance be spent. We think Medicare, they all come to us with, well, Medicare pays for everything. So why is this so expensive? Why is home care so expensive? They come to us with all sorts of assumptions that are not factual. And that's the problem when families are trying to make these types of important decisions, but they're making decisions off of wrong information. Think about it. If you assume that some other entity is going to pay for home care, so then you don't plan ahead, you don't put money aside for home care, or you don't get long-term care insurance, or, you just assume someone else is going to pay for this. And then you find out, because we're usually the ones telling them, because we're the only people in the country who are doing these types of aging planning. So when they find out that, this is all private pay out of pocket, they're like, oh my gosh, how are we going to afford this? And if mom and dad want to stay at home and home care in their area is $50 or $60 an hour, and people are like, well, how can it possibly be that? Well, because of the pandemic, there's a shortage of workers, and it depends on where your parent lives. If they live in northern Wisconsin, there's not 17 home care companies right there, right? And so these home care workers, it just depends on where you live. And if they have to drive an hour just to go serve your parent, they're not going to just stay there for a 3-hour shift. That's why these home care companies you have to commit to a 5, 6, 8-hour shift, or they can't staff it, but there's just so much that families don't know. And that's why they make bad decisions, because they don't know what they don't know. They'll come to us saying Medicare and Medicaid as if it's the same program, and they are two completely different government programs. Or they'll come to us and use the words assisted living and nursing home interchangeably as if they're the same type of care, and they are two completely different levels of care. So when we work with families, we have to actually start from ground zero and just provide them the education and information they need so that they can make informed decisions. And that's why it's so important. And sometimes people are like, well, when is the time to make these arrangements? And I always say the time is now, because all the thousands of people that had major strokes last Thursday didn't wake up thinking, oh, I think I'm going to have a major stroke today, and it's going to destroy my finances or my family. Nobody thinks that, and that's in a way that's good. You don't want to wake up every day going, oh my God, what if something happens to me? But we know at some point it's going to, because no one stays in this world forever, right? We all have an expiration date. So we might as well just be realistic about it. And if you want to have the best quality of life, the best quality of care, and have the best family dynamics, you have to start planning for that now. Because I can tell you from sitting with literally thousands of seniors as they're dying, what worries parents is, how am I leaving my kids? Are they going to get along? Are they going to keep talking to each other? And unfortunately, sometimes family relationships are so strained that if I could have caught that family or worked with that family 3 years prior or 6 months prior, they could have had much better outcomes. But so that's why I pretty much plead with families. If you have aging parents, we need to just, it's not going to cost you anything other than a 30-minute consult, which is going to be worth your time and energy.
One thing I'd love for you to talk about from the social work and from the work you do is defining caregiver, and then talking about how that caregiver typically escalates all the way up to burnout. Because, it's like you said, it's one thing, dad slipped off the ladder, he broke his hip, he needs to be up and moving around. Well, after 3 months of that, then there's something else that comes on, and then there's something else that comes on. So I'd love for you from that social work perspective to kind of talk about that. What's a caregiver, and then how do we identify that burnout?
Yeah, and that is such a good question because when I do speaking engagements and corporate trainings, I'll say how many of you are caregivers? And maybe a couple hands will go up, and so by the time we talk about what is a caregiver is when you're taking time off work, you're stepping away from your family and you're doing tasks. You're going to go get that milk, or you're going over to your parents to pick up their mail because their driveway is too sloped for them to safely go down to the mailbox, or you're taking them to their doctor's appointments, or you're setting up their medications, or you're coordinating all of their different doctor's appointments and therapies, or you're doing hands-on help like laundry, bringing over meals, helping them to the bathroom, doing their housekeeping, paying their bills, talking to the insurance company, um, providing them their transportation wherever they need to go. Those are all caregiving tasks, and you're not getting paid for it, right? And so, and that's the financial cost of caregiving. Or if you're, that's, if you have to constantly fly to wherever your parent lives because they're in Arizona and you're in Ohio, that airfare is like $1,000 at a pop when you get that crisis call that dad's in the hospital again, right? And so I call it the caregiver snowball, where it might start out feeling manageable and doable, like, sure, dad, next time I come see you, I'll take care of your to-do list, paint this, fix that lock, change your oil in your car, whatever. But then in time, it gets to be more and more, and caregiving will end up, or can end up, being a full-time job. Now when you think about how scattered families are, like, 4 kids live in 4 different states, you've got blended families a lot of the times now, and a lot of these kids have never even met each other because maybe their parents got married later in life. So everybody just kind of thinks that mom and dad are doing better than they really are until they aren't. And then everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, what do we do now?" So we talk about that caregiver snowball in you know caregiving when you've got parents that live across the country from each other. I've got daughters that are taking care of up to 6 different aging loved ones. Their in-laws who they may or may not have liked in the first place, that stray aunt who outlived her kids, and then other elderly parents as well, or elderly loved ones. And they're like, I don't even know who I should tend to first. They're constantly doing triage because it's like, well, mom's in the hospital, but dad has to have surgery next week. And they're literally working full time being caregivers. And that's what we talk about, that caregiver snowball, where now you've realized you're overwhelmed. You don't have any of your own personal life. You haven't made it to Bible study or to the hair salon, or you've missed out on different vacations, or you planned vacations, but then something happened and now you can't get the deposit back. So we talk about the emotional, physical, and financial toll of family caregiving, and let's address that sooner rather than later, because it will happen. Burnout will happen when you don't have enough supports in place, like home care or adult daycare services, or leveraging technology. And you will end up burned out as a family if you don't put some strategies and plans. I know plan is, for whatever reason, it's a 4-letter word, but it's the only way to success, right? In any aspect of life. But that's the caregiver snowball, is when you start out thinking, oh, I can do this, but then you realize that this is a longer term issue than what you thought it was going to be. Or you're taking care of mom and now she's okay, but then dad fell, or dad just got diagnosed with cancer and he's mom's caregiver. What do we do now? So that's why we want to really have these conversations sooner rather than later, so that everybody wins.
Oh, sure. Well, and you gave a lot of great examples that I think people can use if you have a sibling that is close to mom or dad and is starting that check-in, doing a few things. You gave us a lot of great examples that as other siblings that might be living distant, if we start hearing about the increase of some of the tasks that are going on, the increase in time, That's a big red flag to me that, hey, we need to pull sis aside, we need to pull brother aside and get really proactive, because otherwise I can imagine at some point somebody's going to either throw up their hands and walk away from the situation. And then that creates a different kind of
Yep.
crisis. Um, so I guess the advice for the listeners would be, if you're seeing somebody start to spend so much time doing these things, even if you're older parent or uncle or whoever it is, may physically still be doing okay. They're not in the hospital. They're not doing, but the time somebody's taking that's actual caregiving time. That's not just, hey, somebody's being a nice person.
Yeah. And so here's what I recommend to all families is don't shy away from these difficult. I mean, we always go into this with such a negative mindset. They're like, "Oh, these are just uncomfortable, difficult conversations." But let's flip that mindset to, if our goal as a family, because I already shared at the top of the podcast, mom and dad's goals: age in place at home, not be a burden to my kids. Guess who's calling care right? The kids. The kids' goals, literally for 30 years, when I ask their families, what are your goals? We want mom and dad to be safe. We want them to be happy. We want them to have the best quality of life and the best quality of care possible. Well, the only way to marry those two sets of goals is we need to start talking about it and putting a plan and a strategy in place. And so, mistakes that families make constantly are these. Number one, like I already said, denial, thick layers of denial, but also not listening to each other. So if that son or daughter is saying, God, dad has another doctor's appointment, or mom fell again, and I got the call at 3 a.m. and I missed a really important meeting with my boss, that next day because I was in the ER for 8 hours, because that's what happens, right? So you need to listen to each other and say, you know what, we need to start talking now and figuring out, how do we bring mom and dad into these conversations. And again, that's why we facilitate those family meetings on Zoom, because these are too scary of conversations for families to have. And when they do try to have them on their own, what happens is emotions get in the way, family dynamics. Well, brother Tom said something hurtful to me 20 years ago, and now he's lost all credibility or whatever. But like, start the conversations, listen to each other, give each other grace, because you're all in uncharted territory. But when that son or daughter, your sibling says, look, I'm in over my head, or yet another vacation had to get canceled because mom's in the hospital, those are all warning signs that your sibling is getting burned out. And if you ignore it, at some point, they will often say, look, I did my time with mom and dad, now they're yours. And when that happens, because it happens, because they're burned out, because they don't have an aging plan. So when those things happen, then you're forced into figuring out, okay, well, now what do we do? And so then mom and dad end up in a facility that might be, may or may not be a good option for them, but we want to stay ahead of these things because they are going to happen. Caregiving is going to happen. Aging is going to happen. Chronic illness is likely going to happen. It's not like we get healthier as we age. So let's just start the conversation now. The other, I wouldn't say necessarily mistake, but the other knee-jerk reaction adult kids often make is, because they're in crisis, because they don't have an aging plan, they don't have a strategy. Dad fell again. This is the last time, Dad, that you're going to fall. Next fall you're going to end up having to move in with me, right? So guess what? Dad falls because he has Parkinson's, and that's just to be expected. And so, but the kids don't know that because they don't do the research of what their parent has. So they don't really know what they're getting themselves into. And that's why we do that. We educate you on what your loved one's conditions are so you can be realistic. So then they move dad in with them, and it seems like it's okay until it's not, because then dad's falling all the time and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't feel comfortable leaving him home alone. Now what do we do? Or, maybe dad is still okay most of the time, but then, and it's workable, caring for him and having him stay there is workable, but now he keeps falling and now he's got a broken hip, and now what? Or he can't make it to the bathroom anymore. And so now your house looks and smells like a nursing home because you got the wheelchair, the walker, commode, all this stuff happening. Or what if dad has a dog and he needs to bring his dog with him and you never liked the dog, or the dog bites, or the dog isn't housebroke like you thought it was, So these knee-jerk reactions that people make in crisis mode, they're not thinking because they're just looking at problem, solution. They're not looking down the road of, okay, what's our exit strategy if this doesn't work out? If I have to keep missing work, or I can't feel comfortable, dad is going to, you know, not not fall in the shower, what are we going to do? Or dad's dementia progresses and now he's coming into the bedroom at 3 o'clock in the morning wanting breakfast, and your husband's like, look, I've had it. This is it. This is enough. Or your kids can't play because they're loud and running around, and that's upsetting to your parents. So there's all these things, all these conversations that we have with our families, with our clients, so that they can really make informed decisions and be like, okay, I guess I never thought about that. Or what if dad doesn't want to wear his hearing aids and the TV is super loud, and what do? Everybody has their own habits,
Right.
and if they don't jive.
Sure. Sure. No, that's a lot to think about. And it just brings out even more why you have to have these conversations and you have to get a plan in place. And it doesn't have to be set in stone. I mean, if circumstances changes a year from now, 5 years from now, adjust the plan. But at least you have, pretty much 80% of it, right? And you're
Yeah.
adjusting 20%.
Right. And that's why we do that aging planning, because it's what are their current care needs? What's working well? What's not working well? What are their diagnoses? Because we know certain things are going to happen with certain diagnoses, right? And we just know aging. We don't get healthier. So let's just be realistic and plan for that and solve for those issues. But what's that future care need? If mom and dad can't stay at home, or they can't afford to stay at home, we do that care matrix project for families and say, okay, given the zip code that you wanted us to explore, here's different care facilities. We teach them what are the differences in levels of care, what's independent living, assisted living, memory care, because they don't know the differences of all of those, and they all have different price tags too, right? And so they also don't know what questions to ask during a tour. So we provide them education and a checklist of here's different questions to ask during the tour. Families don't realize that when you move into a care facility or have home care companies, you have to be on guard. You have to know the lay of the land. Not all these healthcare workers are in the right jobs. They're not all properly trained. They may not care, or they may be so overwhelmed and, working double shifts all the time that they're just overwhelmed, and they're going to miss things with your parents, right? They're going to miss that urinary tract infection of mom's getting more confused. Why is that? Well, because she's got a urinary tract infection brewing, and their workers are too busy or not trained enough to catch those signs, and then mom ends up septic in the hospital, which could have been prevented. So we teach families how to be a bold advocate, because you can't, just because you're paying thousands of dollars in care doesn't mean that they're being properly taken care of.
Right.
And then we also, most of our clients, when we do that planning with them, they stay on services for care coordination or patient advocacy, because now they're like, oh my gosh, I can get my life back on track. I just want to be the son or the daughter. I don't want to have to do all this other ancillary stuff for mom and dad that needs to be done, but I don't want to do it anymore. So then they outsource all that to us. But the goal is, you can't assume that things are going to be okay at home forever. And some of these quality care facilities have 2, 3, 4, 5 years of waiting lists. So that's why we do that care matrix of, start doing these tours now, so that get your name on the waiting list of 3 or 4 different care communities, so that just in case you can't stay at home, you're at a higher probability of at least getting into a care community that you have some familiarity with.
Oh, sure. Sure. That's great advice. Annalee, as we're starting to wrap things up, is there anything about senior planning, anything about caregiving that you'd like to bring up that I haven't asked you or we haven't touched on?
I think we touched on quite a bit that probably everybody's head is like, ooh, gosh, this isn't her first rodeo.
Right.
She gave us a lot of food for thought. So my goal is always to educate and inform families, and then that way they can make smart decisions. But, if any of this hit home for any of your listeners, let's just set up a consult and talk through it, because you may start feeling overwhelmed, or now that you've heard this podcast and you're like, oh my gosh, all these things Annalee says, check, 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 check. I should probably figure out what we're going to do here sooner rather than later. So, if you're listening to this, we're here to help you, and we want you to be successful as a family and have successful quality care for your parents as well. And the only way to do that is through working out a strategy.
Sure. And as we're wrapping this up, what are some of the products and information that you have available, as well as what's the best way to get in contact with you at CareRight?
Yeah, definitely through the the CareRight Inc. website, the CareRightInc.com website. Product wise, we have the Grab and Go binder, which is an organizational tool for you, and it's got checklists behind each tab. So your accounts, passwords, estate documents, insurance policies, who are the main providers, like your doctors, your financial planner, your CPA. So it's that Grab and Go binder, is that organizational tool. Another product that we have is my book, The Invisible Patient, the emotional, financial, and physical toll of family caregiving. My book is jam-packed with checklists, with scripts, with considerations if you have aging parents, and what do we do with them. I've had thousands of sons and daughters say, I wish that there was like an operating manual of what to do with mom and dad, and so I wrote one like 3 years ago. We also have, for those that may not have a budget for consulting or coaching services, the white glove approach. We have do-it-yourself versions of an aging plan, where we provide you with a template for aging planning and all these different considerations. It's video tutorials, so you can do it yourself. And then you can always contact us when you find yourself in over your head. So we have all sorts of different, service offerings for any price point. Like my book is $20. So if you don't have $20, there's nothing I can do to help you. But you have to be invested in your own outcomes, right? We can't be more invested in families than they are for themselves. So the best way to reach us is schedule that 30-minute consult on the CareRight Inc. website. If any of this hit home for you, any of it hit home for you, let's talk, and know that you're not in this by yourself.
Oh, that's perfect. And folks, please do go check out CareRightInc.com, and I'll be sure to put a link to everything into the show notes as well. So if you're out walking the dog, taking a drive, whatever, you can go to my website at cool-grandpa.us or straight to CareRightInc.com. But we'll make sure everything's in the show notes so it's nice and easy. And Annalee, I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk with us about senior planning and about caregiving. This is super important for us because there's grandparents that are taking care of moms and dads that are aging, and as well as trying to balance out our lives and the lives of our adult kids and grandkids. So this is super important for this group.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Greg. And thanks for all you're doing as well with bringing awareness and that work and that kind of grandparent work-life balance. So.
Well, thank you so much, and have a good rest of the day.
I will, you too.
I really appreciated Annalee coming on to the Cool Grandpa podcast to talk about CareRight and to talk about the services that she offers. This was a great reminder for all of us to be proactive in developing a great plan for our families, our friends, our loved ones that are seniors, as well as those that are younger than us, right? So that we can avoid some of the crises that Annalee was talking about. I know that after I talked with Annalee, I sat down with my mom and my stepdad to be able to go over some of these details that Annalee had talked about. Now, thankfully, my mom and my stepdad were really proactive. They've got their binder ready to go. They've got all this documentation. But it was important that I knew where that was and that we were able to locate it quickly should we need to make any decisions. Now, I know these are difficult and sometimes not real fun conversations to have, but I think they are important. And I hope you take to heart these conversations and these examples that Annalee shared with us. So if you want to get connected with Annalee, I've got links to Care Right Incorporated and Annalee in the show notes, as well as some other ways that you can get in touch with her and her fantastic team. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I know I did, and it was full of useful information. Not all of it fun, but definitely something that cool grandpas need to have in order to make sure that our loved ones are taken care of and that we can take care of those that we love. Until next time, remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.